you set up something, if I remember the title correctly, the Provost Task Force on University Priorities, which set the template and the foundation for the Stanford Challenge campaign that followed.
Correct. Interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary work was increasing. Stanford, because of its broad strength across the disciplines, could have a unique opportunity to do some really incredible things. And I remember early on to the trustees, I said, we're looking for a process where Stanford at the end is going to be bigger than the sum of its parts in its impact and what it does. So we started with those faculty planning committees because that's really where any academic planning, that's where the expertise lies. And you've got to do, and we picked faculty who we thought would be forward-looking in terms of their disciplines and their directions, but who would be collegial and who could make those kinds of, see those cross-disciplinary opportunities, but would also be willing to try to say, okay, here are the highest priorities. And that process, I think, brought us to a really good set of insights about what we should do, right? And particularly environmental area, building up the arts, which really came out of that. Out of that, we could shape, with the input from the deans and getting the deans to work together, something that really was a coherent plan for the university that had some clear flagships in it.
So you use the word flagships. In my mind, I think of the flagships have the names FSI, Woods, and BioX. These centers take on a lot of weight in the ecosystem of the university, and they're not wholly, synchronous with or friction-free in their relations with the traditional departments. How do you manage their relationships?
How do you manage the relationships with the departments? We wanted both quality control that the departments have traditionally done, but we also wanted these new efforts to pull the departments in important ways. Pull together, let's say in the environment with the Woods Institute, pull a set of departments that had research related to issues of sustainability in the direction of trying to focus greater on the issue of long-term sustainability of our planet. We didn't want the institutes to separate from the departments. We wanted them to collaborate. And it's a balancing act. I think it's one that works well because we can do a joint appointments at Stanford. If you were an institution that didn't have joint appointments as part of its quiver, instead of a matrix organization, which is more or less what we have, you would set up things that were parallel to the departments. And then the tension is even larger in many ways. So there's a monetary competition as well. That we're now more than a decade into these, and I think they're working pretty well by and large.
John Hennessy put resources on the table so that the institutes would be able to have essentially matching funds for recruiting. That made it possible to kind of leverage the opportunities to search for somebody who was inclined towards interdisciplinary research and yet who by definition had their own discipline. So John's vision put resources on the table that would incentivize building the interdisciplinary programs.
How does somebody get to be an independent lab?
It was made very straightforward by Stanford policy that was actually written in 1982. Al Hasdorf was the provost then. And if you look at that policy on establishing independent lab centers and institutes, it is fantastically forward-looking. It describes really a structure that works. And there's a list of criteria there which are absolutely the right ones in my view, and how they were so creative. First of all, it has to be built around a set of issues and challenges that are expected to be of long-lasting challenge. It's got to be by those criteria of interest to faculty from multiple schools and departments. Certain very cross-cutting types and areas of research, you need everybody. I, as Vice Provost Dean of Research, spent a lot of time in meetings with colleagues from around the country. And of course, it was a time when many universities were working towards creating these kinds of interdisciplinary institutes. And the question was always, well, how do you how do you change the university structure to get people to realize that not everything has to be done within a department in a school? And so I always felt very lucky to be able to say, here's the policy from 1982. We did not have to invent a new structure. Where there was opposition, it was possible to say, well, this has been done for the last 20 plus years, for example, with CPER. It's really works, and it's not going to undermine the departments. And that history really made it so much easier for us.
BioX, like a lot of things that have been successful, there are a lot of people that will say, it was my idea. And I suppose I'm one of them. I remember going to some kind of event at the faculty club. There was a break, I think, and I went over, and Jim Spudich and Steve Chu were talking about how they had brought their labs together in collaboration. Steve is a physicist, and Spudich is a medical school faculty member, and came out of this that maybe we should organize some way to encourage that to happen at Stanford. And we realized that even though the medical school was closer to the other faculty, you still didn't have people working together. And so the idea came of forming an organization and a place to have things happen. And that led to the Clark Center, of course. If you have the physical structure and organizational structure of BioX, you not only encourage planned interactions, but you make possible interactions that are accidental. People get together, say in the cafeteria. They may sit next to somebody who has a different background and talk about what they're doing and find out there is some reason to carry that a little farther. That's sort of one of the ideas behind the physical configuration of the Clark Center.